In Brussels, they're dreaming of a busy Christmas. Shops reopened in Belgium on Tuesday despite a recent rise in COVID-19 cases, but bars and restaurants have to stay closed. Shopkeepers here in Belgium are hoping to make the most of the reopening. But with daily COVID-19 infections rising and the reproduction rate at almost 1, the government's not ruling out bringing in new restrictions at the end of this week. Over the border in the Netherlands, they've gone into a 5-week lockdown, closing all non-essential shops as well as schools. Prime Minister Mark Rutte insists that rising infection rates make it essential to, in his words, bite through this very sour apple before things get better.
It's totally understandable. The numbers are skyrocketing. If this wasn't done, the consequences cannot be neglected.
A lockdown is not really the solution, but stricter enforcement like compulsory face masks using the coronavirus app and at shopping malls your temperature should be checked.
But there's new hope, the prospect of mass vaccinations across Europe. After pressure from the German government, the European Union's regulatory body is set to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine next Monday. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, tweeted, "I welcome the EMA bringing forward its meeting to discuss the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine before Christmas. Likely that the first Europeans will be vaccinated before the end of 2020. Germany hopes to vaccinate up to 4 million citizens by the end of the year, but with hundreds still dying from the coronavirus every day, it's bringing in a national lockdown on Wednesday. In France, they've lifted a lockdown, but they're bringing in a nighttime curfew and bars and restaurants remain closed. Tuesday saw members of the cultural industries protest, angry that places like museums and theatres are not allowed to open.
The huge numbers of cinemas and theatres that will close is catastrophic. Paris will no longer be the cultural city it was before the lockdown.
You can't say one sector is essential and another is not. There's no evidence of clusters in theatres and cinemas.
Now the government's advising people to quarantine before meeting up at Christmas.
The Scientific Council is saying, and I view that as reasonable, if you can, self-confine for 8 days before Christmas. If you can, it's not possible for everyone.
Across Europe, the message from governments is the same. Please be careful over Christmas, so the new year can be a better one. Nadeem Barber, Al Jazeera, Brussels.
In California and across the U.S., the COVID-19 numbers are staggering. In Los Angeles County, population 10 million, there were fewer than 100 intensive care unit beds available on Tuesday. In some areas, like the Central Valley and counties east of Los Angeles, there are 0 ICU beds left.
More people will die because the whole health care system is overwhelmed.
Statewide, more than 42,000 cases of COVID-19 were reported on Monday, breaking all previous single-day records.
We're still in the tunnel, going through the most challenging and difficult surge we've experienced since the beginning of this pandemic.
Most of the state is under a stay-at-home order. Still, public officials pleaded with people to wear masks and socially distance.
We just had to order 5,000 additional body bags they just purchased for the state. That should be sobering.
After more than 300,000 deaths nationwide, millions of doses of Pfizer's vaccine are now being distributed around the country, with medical workers at the front of the line. More encouraging news came from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which found Moderna's vaccine candidate to be 94% effective. Emergency FDA authorization for the vaccine is expected by the end of the week. A new poll shows 71% of the U.S. population wants to get vaccinated right away. That's an 8% increase from September. Widespread vaccine acceptance is essential to combating the virus. Vaccine rollout also costs money. Congress is still working on multi-billion-dollar COVID relief legislation, but they're not there yet.
No matter how long it takes, we'll be here until we get a COVID package.
The country's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci, recommended that President-elect Joe Biden, who is 78 years old, and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris get vaccinated right away in the interests of national security.
You want him fully protected as he enters into the presidency in January. So that would be my strong recommendation.
Biden said he'd take that advice.
But when I do it, you'll have notice, and we'll do it publicly.
Much of the ongoing nationwide surge is attributed to virus exposure during travel and family gatherings over the Thanksgiving holiday last month. With Hanukkah underway and Christmas coming next week, doctors are begging Americans to stay home and stay safe. Rob Reynolds, Al Jazeera, Los Angeles.
According to several polls, over 50% of French people say they have no intention of getting vaccinated against COVID-19. A lot of people are worried about the consequences of the vaccine, side effects, essentially. Now, to get an idea of just how divided the French are over the COVID vaccination, just listen to elderly people in nursing homes, the first in line in the nationwide vaccination campaign. Even some couples are divided.
Toujours fait les vaccins, toujours. Si c'était obligatoire, je le ferais, mais si ça ne l'est pas, je le ferai pas.
Pourquoi?
De crainte.
De le convaincre? Ah non, ce n'est pas la peine. C'est même pas la peine d'essayer.
C'est comme les comptes en banque, ça, chacun le sien.
Il faut commencer par quelqu'un, vous allez me dire. Autant les personnes âgées. On verra bien.
C'est quand même actuellement la seule chose qu'on a pour enrayer l'épidémie. Mais c'est une chose qui fait peur.
On se dit, mais enfin quoi, on est quoi, des cobayes, on est quoi, des bestioles?
As you heard there, lots of fear, but there's nothing really new here, Florence, because vaccine scepticism runs rather deep in France.
It sure does. France repeatedly tops the charts. For instance, in early 2019, there was a global Gallup study on public attitudes towards science and health. And you can see here, when asked whether vaccines are safe, French people disagreed the most out of 140 countries. 33% of people in France disagree that vaccines are safe. And according to the same poll, 20% of French people don't believe that vaccines are even effective.
Now, until the start of the 2000s, around 90% of French people were pro-vaccine, but over the years, the effectiveness of vaccinations has increasingly been put into question. Just why is that?
Well, some of the reasons are very similar to other anti-vaxxer arguments that you can get around the world. There are conspiracy theories online about the dangers of vaccinations, unfound links between vaccines and autism, for instance, or even conspiracy theories that say that Big Pharma and the government are putting profitability ahead of people's health. But vaccine skepticism is actually a lot like a virus, and it spreads particularly online. Now, the French government has been trying to do a lot. There is no vaccination, unfortunately, against conspiracy theories, but the government certainly has been pushing education, transparency campaigns, trying to build trust, but it really does remain a hot button and divisive issue in France.
Des gens qui ont déclenché des polios suite au vaccin de la polio, contrairement à ce qu'on veut bien nous faire croire. On a eu des paralysies, et puis tout un tas d'autres maladies, la sclérose en plaques liée au vaccin à l'hépatite B, et ainsi de suite.
Bon, je me demandais est-ce que c'était réellement utile. Bon, c'est vrai que j'en ai parlé avec les professionnels de santé qui m'ont quand même dit que malgré tout, ça se justifiait et j'ai suivi leurs indications.
Many more Americans could soon be vaccinated against the coronavirus. The FDA has authorized Moderna's vaccine for emergency use. It's now the second vaccine available for use in the United States. 6 million new doses will be shipped across the country beginning on Sunday. A recent article in The Atlantic calls the next 6 months, quote, vaccine purgatory. It describes how this time period after vaccines are approved could be strange and confusing, especially while some people are vaccinated, many others have to wait. The author of that article, Sarah Zhang, is a staff writer at The Atlantic. She joins us now. Sarah, your article calls this time period vaccine purgatory. Tell us a little bit more about why you're calling it that.
Yeah, that's right. So, we spent kind of the past year kind of adjusting to what, living in the pandemic looks like, right? We've adjusted to this new pandemic normal. And over the next 6 months, we're going to go through this maybe longer, actually. We'll be going through this long period where some people are getting vaccinated, some people are still waiting. The rules of what you're supposed to do might kind of be in flux. So we're just going to be going through, and, we don't really know exactly how long it will take, who will get it. These are things that are still kind of up in the air. So I think I just wanted everyone to get a sense of what the next few months will look like. There will be a lot of unanswered questions currently, but we'll get those answers eventually, and eventually at some point we'll all get vaccinated.
Eventually, there's a lot of, I think this whole pandemic has had a lot of, it's going to come eventually. We're going to learn eventually. We just have to be patient. And in your report, you actually point out that we don't know how long this purgatory period is going to last. What's the latest guidance or estimate for when the average American is likely going to get the vaccine?
Yeah, so Operation Warp Speed has kind of put out a timeline saying that maybe we can start vaccinating sort of everyone who's not in a priority population by April and May, and by June, hopefully, most people who want the vaccine will get it. The sort of really big bottleneck is really just, do we have enough doses of the vaccine, right? And so, first of all, we have 2 really great vaccines right now.
For Joseph R. Biden of Delaware, a Democrat, ayes 55, noes 0.
California's Electoral College vote made it official. Joe Biden is the president-elect. And in the end, the formal tally of the states Joe Biden won in the November election was the procedural affair it normally is. Across the country, electors in states that Biden flipped from the Republicans cast their states' votes for the president-elect.
Joseph R. Biden has received 16 votes.
Under the U.S. Constitution, the president isn't chosen by the popular vote, but by the 538 electors of the Electoral College. However, usually they follow the majority vote in each of their states. As part of the Trump campaign's efforts to overturn the election results, efforts were made to subvert that process.
The electors have unanimously cast 16 votes for Joseph R. Biden.
But even in Michigan, one of several states where electors were given a police escort, the vote was conducted without surprise. And eventually, 306 electors across the country voted for Biden, 232 for Trump. Soon after, Joe Biden made a national address calling for the page to be turned.
306 electoral votes is the same number of electoral votes that Donald Trump and Vice President Pence received when they won in 2016. Excuse me. At the time, President Trump called the Electoral College tally a landslide. By his own standards, these numbers represented a clear victory then, and I respectfully suggest they do so now.
After a 6-day ordeal, local officials in the northwestern Katsina state gave the news the nation has been waiting for. The boys have been released.
344 of the students have been handed over to security agencies. We'll have them medically examined, and arrangements will be on the way to unite them with their families.
It remains unclear if any of the schoolboys are still being held. Earlier in the day, a video purportedly from the Boko Haram jihadist group showed a distraught teenager who said he was among 520 kidnapped students. It's also not known if Boko Haram carried out the raid, which would mark an expansion of their territory, or if armed criminal gangs known locally as bandits might have sold them to the Islamic insurgents. The schoolboys were taken last Friday from the secondary school in Katsina by gunmen on motorcycles who marched them into Rugu forest and released them almost a week later after negotiations with the government. It came amid angry demonstrations against President Muhammadu Buhari's administration due to the insecurity in the north.
Nigeria has today been abandoned at the mercy of vicious insurgents, bandits, kidnappers, armed robbers, rapists, and assortment of hardened criminals who roam about and operate with ease.
The abduction has gripped the nation already incensed by widespread insecurity and brought back painful memories of the Chibok schoolgirls abducted by Boko Haram in 2014.
It's not a prison, it's a camp. And for these migrants and refugees, the former Miral warehouse in Velika Kadusha in northern Bosnia is a staging post on their journey to the promised land, Europe. Some have spent years getting to this point.
My dream is a better life, living condition good, people, everything, lifestyle, good living style, good working.
The conditions here are basic, but they have heat, shelter and clean water. They are lucky these men from Algeria are not. They have no electricity, no water, no proper heating. All of them have tried and failed to cross the border into Croatia, and failure comes with a price. This man shows the bruises on his legs he says were caused by Croatian police, who robbed him and then sent him back barefoot. His aim is to get to France and beatings are not a deterrent.
There's nothing for me in Algeria. The Algerian government does nothing for its people. I'm 40 years old, I have nothing. I've looked for work there, but there is none.
The Danish Refugee Council says that in October alone they recorded 189 claims of extreme violence by Croatian police against the migrants and refugees. But there's been no investigation so far. Hundreds more migrants are scattered in woodlands throughout the area. These are the most basic of shelters made by men, mostly from Afghanistan, Pakistan and Bangladesh. They moved here when the Bosnian authorities closed their camp in Bihać 2 months ago because of local opposition.
European Union, any country like this country.
This man says he's tried 10 times to cross the border and has spent nearly $15,000 on trying since he left his home 2 years ago. He says he wants to go anywhere in the European Union. Anywhere is good, he says. But winter is coming, and in northern Bosnia there is snow and temperatures can drop well below freezing. Survival will be difficult. Bosnia has been split about what to do about the problem.
And the worst is that in some humanitarian crises you don't have enough money, so you cannot take care of everyone else. Here the funding is not an issue. We have the funding to take care of those people in proper centres, but simply because of the lack of political decision making, we actually cannot take care of them in the way that we should.
It's a sad irony that in a country that was so dependent on international aid and assistance during the war, that apparently not the same kind of humanity is being shown to people who simply want a better life. But this never-ending problem is leading to a growing anti-migrant feeling here. At first, migrants and refugees were helped 2 years on, and some feel differently.
They're causing problems, they're upsetting locals, they're breaking into private houses and apartments and destroy them.
Please God, go. It's enough.
International aid agencies have been providing basic supplies and sleeping bags, but they describe it as the very minimum needed. To some, this will be just another migrant story. There have been so many. To others, it will be one of arduous journeys taken by those who are trying to escape poverty and hardship and make a better life. In the woods and abandoned buildings in northern Bosnia, a better life looks a long way away. Tony Bertley, Al Jazeera, Velika Kladuša.
There is no let up in Yemen's suffering. An estimated 3 million people are displaced. Most live in desert encampments like this one, surviving as best as they can, waiting for help from the outside world. Thousands are enduring the cold on the waterless plains in Al-Shab camp near the city of Aden in the south.
We are suffering due to the cold weather. We need blankets from organizations and philanthropists. There is no support for the children in this cold. The coronavirus pandemic, disease, and malnutrition are all adding up to make life here extremely difficult. We need a health center in the camp to deal with malnutrition and also to treat pregnant women.
Even before the war, Yemen imported 90% of its staple food, wheat, but supplies are now cut off. A sharp fall in the value of the Yemeni rial has led to the prices of essential commodities like food and medicine soaring. In the absence of help from the government and international organizations, most people here are at the mercy of the elements.
The prices of everything have increased. Even for bread and vegetables, prices have gone up because the road is cut off, so everything is expensive. For me, I'm a motorcycle driver. My daily income is not even $6, so I cannot afford to eat.
Yemen has been mired in war since late 2014, when the Houthi rebels seized control of several northern provinces and forced the internationally recognized government of President Abdel Mansour Hadi out of the capital Sana'a. A Saudi UAE-led coalition then intervened with devastating consequences. In a country racked by conflict, no one knows how many people are dying from diseases such as cholera or from the COVID-19 pandemic. Yemen's health system has all but collapsed. Across the country, doctors say hospital beds are full and they don't know where to put the sick and dying. Dr. Abdul Latif Al-Talib is head of Sanaa's Al-Thawra Hospital.
The war has had a huge impact on the health sector. We've been affected by the brutal aggression on our country and the air and sea blockade. We suffer from a dire shortage of medicines such as cancer drugs, open heart surgery drugs and others. Unfortunately, aid organizations also have a monopoly on what support they offer, and we have no say on what help they bring in. All this leads to a severe shortage of service, whether in the Al Thora hospital or in other hospitals.
There are many causes of the war in Yemen, but there are only two consequences: death and the destruction of people's livelihoods. Mohammed Adu, Al Jazeera.
3.5 years ago, amid persistent opposition protests, Venezuela's embattled President Nicolás Maduro announced he was unilaterally calling for a constituent assembly to rewrite the constitution written by his predecessor, deceased President Hugo Chavez.
I summon the native constituent power to achieve the peace that the Republic needs to overthrow the fascist coup, and so that the people, with their sovereignty, will be able to impose peace, harmony, and a true national dialogue.
Even appeals from the Pope couldn't stop him from forming a 500-member body with superpowers above all other institutions. Critics were quick to predict that its real aim was to annihilate the opposition-controlled parliament and consolidate a dictatorship. Indeed, the Assembly's most notable achievement was to strip more than 30 opposition deputies of their parliamentary immunity so that they could be arrested and tried for allegedly inciting violence or treason.
It's fairly brazen. It's clear now that, as it was indeed, of course, from the beginning, but it's even clearer now, that the intention was merely to provide a kind of rubber stamp parliament for the Maduro government so that it could pass, ostensibly at least, pass laws, many of which have been extremely repressive.
Do you know of any other country in the world where something like this has happened?
Certainly, I would imagine it has to be the only instance of a constituent assembly, that has not even debated a single article of a proposed new constitution.
Now that the ruling Socialist Party will take total control of the legislature on January 5th after highly contested elections, the Constituent Assembly is being dissolved just as quickly as it was created.
We're handing over a country in peace, in peace, in peace, with a newly elected legislature with diverse representation that will assume the challenge of maintaining constitutionality.
Cabello says they've done their duty without having changed a comma of the original constitution. Not, say critics, that was ever the point. Lucia Newman, Al Jazeera.
The economies of Latin America and the Caribbean have been hit particularly hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. So any grain of good news is welcome when grim new statistics are announced.
Hace que nuestras cifras son negativas.
Our figures are negative, all negative. It doesn't mean that we are much better off than we were in July, but the drops are a little lower than forecast.
Those statistics still translate into tens of thousands of businesses closing, growing unemployment, poverty and homelessness. But if it's bad in Latin America, it's even worse in Argentina. The economy here shrinking by 10% in the third quarter of 2020. Workers and social organisations have already taken to the streets. On Thursday alone, we covered 2 demonstrations within walking distance of the Al Jazeera office.
What we'd like is health to be a priority, especially in this pandemic year, and this in a country where 50% of children are poor and need public hospitals. It would be an increase to make the health system work.
Along with the peso hitting an all-time low against the US dollar, it's inflation that bites into workers' wages. Argentina has one of the worst rates in the world, more than 30% this year, forecast to be even higher next year.
We've been saying on all our marches, when the workers lose through inflation, it's not because that money is disappearing. It's because someone is profiting with what should be ours and the rest of the workers.
President Alberto Fernandez took office just weeks before the pandemic arrived. He said from the start he'd put the nation's health before the economy. But with the Russian Sputnik V vaccine due to arrive here next week, the economy hasn't gone away.
Protests like this, noisy and colourful, are a regular feature of everyday life in Argentina. But with the COVID-19 pandemic having hit the country particularly hard, they're only likely to increase in size and intensity.
The question is always where the money's going to come from. Argentina is one of the world's leading grain producers, but the industry has been paralysed as a strike by workers demanding a wage increase enters its second week. Part of a growing demand from workers across Argentina and the rest of Latin America. They don't want to emerge from the pandemic worse off than they went into it. Daniel Schweimler, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
Torrential rain floods into this refugee camp in northwest Syria. Families are doing whatever they can to stay warm in makeshift tents covered in mud.
Our condition is very bad. We have no proper tents nor a proper living. I have 10 children and we do not get any aid. We collect firewood to run the heater.
Aid agencies estimate nearly 500,000 people are huddled in camps like this in Idlib, the last rebel-held area in Syria. Rains are affecting this area particularly badly. The drainage system is poor and floodwater is seeping into overcrowded shelters. Basic supplies are running out.
Our situation is dire. We do not get aid and we don't have heaters or fuel. Roads that lead to the camp are cut off because it's based on an agricultural land.
It's been described as the largest mass displacement in almost 10 years of conflict in Syria. Millions are now homeless after a Russian-backed Syrian government offensive this year. And now the UN warns the harsh winter could become a breeding ground for the coronavirus and other deadly diseases. Overcrowding in the camps is making it difficult to keep a social distance.
We were displaced during the regime's last campaign. We are suffering a lot in the winter. The tents would fall on us and would have to keep on resetting them throughout the night. Look, it's like a pond. It's as though we're in Venice. We would need a boat to go from one tent to the next. Where are the humanitarian organizations?
Many of the people here have nowhere else to go, and they're desperate for help from the international community. They've lived through harsh winters like this before. Now they cling to whatever they hope they can find in this camp, facing another battle in a long war they're hoping to survive. Rahila Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
For over 1,000 years, the ancient city of Venice, Italy, has been trying to keep floodwaters at bay. Just this week, Venice was flooded when tides surged higher than officials expected. But now a recently completed barrier system has been activated. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay is in Venice with more.
Now, normally during high tide in Venice, I could have water up to my knees, but take a look around. St. Mark's Square is dry, and it's all thanks to a flood prevention system, one that cost €6.5 billion, and it's proving successful. It's far from perfect, but it could be this city's best chance at survival.
Dickens once said you'd shed tears to see Venice. But overnight, as 4 feet of tidal seawater try to engulf the city, it's these 78 retractable dikes that could almost make you weep, says Chief Engineer Francesco Olsola.
It's a very emotional.
It's called Mose, Italian for Moses, and just like in the Old Testament, it's parting the sea, keeping the Adriatic from swallowing its crown jewel.
For centuries, it was water that protected Venice from invaders until it became the invader itself. Now, these floodgates are the only thing standing between the exquisite and extinction.
Last year, climate change and high tides triggered the worst flooding in more than 50 years. A catastrophe in a city whose lifeblood is its beauty. A catastrophe, this time, averted.
Without Mose, every day, more or less, every day is flooded.
Technically, it's still a work in progress, says Venice Mayor Luigi Brugnaro. Like a suit of armor, yet with chinks. It takes an excruciating 48 hours to activate. Not enough warning to thwart a flash flood earlier this week, swamping St. Mark's Basilica and workshops like Paolo Brandolizio's, where he's been carving gondola oarlocks for 26 years. It doesn't take much, does it, for water to come in here?
No,
it's just a few inches away, he says, right at the doorstep, just like the global climate crisis, says environmental scientist Jane DeMosto.
Venice, I think, is the canary in the mine for other places that need to make very radical choices about how to survive in the future.
And for now, Venice's radical choice is working, and climate scientists are saying cities in the U.S., specifically those on the coast, should pay close attention. Places like Los Angeles, Boston, and Miami that could be seeing their own severe flooding in the coming decades. Vlad, Anne-Marie?
All right, Chris Livesay, thank you very much.
For the second time in 6 months, the moon passed over the sun in the southern hemisphere, creating a stunning spectacle that turns day into night. Unfortunately for residents and tens of thousands of visitors and astronomers who traveled to southern Chile's Araucanía region, the weather clouded over what they'd hoped would be a perfect clear view. Eclipses never cease to amaze, especially astronomers. They study the sun's corona, which drives solar winds and can produce alterations in the cycles of the Earth. Why is it so important to be able to see the corona better, though?
It's also very important. Then we cannot forget that the sun is really the boss in the solar system. Say, if you turn off the sun, life on Earth, we included, will die in less than a week.
In the capital, Santiago, only 80% of the moon could be seen covering the sun.
Well, this is about as good as it's going to get. I can still see a sliver of the sun peeking through. You can still see sunlight out here, but it's darker than it was just a half an hour ago at high noon. There are no clouds in the sky. It was boiling hot, and now it feels much, much colder.
Residents who'd come to see and feel the same thing were not disappointed.
This gives you a different energy. It's an extraordinary sight, a privilege.
In 2024, another total solar eclipse will pass through Mexico and parts of the United States. But there won't be another one in this exact place for another 400 years.